In the skies over war-torn Europe, the German Luftwaffe carried an unshakable arrogance. By 1943, their pilots had terrorized Allied bombers with ruthless efficiency. Veteran aces boasted dozens, sometimes hundreds of kills. To them, the air war was a chessboard, and they were always several moves ahead. But then, a new unit appeared on the horizon. They were dismissed at first, mocked as a political experiment, laughed at for the color of their skin and the bold red paint on their aircraft tails. To the Luftwaffe, they were Schwarze-Vogel-Menschen, black birdmen, and insult, spat out in arrogance. To many in America, they weren't even supposed to be here, yet history would soon remember them by a different name, the Tuskegee Airmen, the Red Tails. At first, the Luftwaffe was amused. These colored pilots, some scoffed. They won't last a month, but in just a few short years, the men of the 332nd Fighter Group would rack up over 100 confirmed aerial victories, earning the grudging respect of enemies and rewriting the very meaning of patriotism in a segregated America. This is not just the story of dogfights over Europe. It is the story of courage against mockery, of determination against discrimination, of pilots who fought two wars at once, one against the Nazis abroad and one against racism at home. Tonight, we step into the cockpits of the Red Tails and witness the moment when ridicule turned to fear and fear turned to respect. But before they could soar to glory, the Tuskegee Airmen first had to prove they even belonged in the sky. December 7, 1941. The attack on Pearl Harbor plunged the United States into the Second World War. Overnight, a nation still reeling from the Great Depression was mobilized into a global fight against fascism. But within America's own borders, another battle raged. In 1940s America, segregation was the law of the land. Jim Crow dictated where black citizens could live, eat, ride, and even serve. The U.S. military was no exception. Many believed black men were unfit to fly, lacking the intelligence, the reflexes, or the courage required of fighter pilots. A 1925 Army War College study even declared Negroes are a low order of intelligence and cannot be trusted in positions of command. And yet, thousands of young black men volunteered. They filled out applications, wrote desperate letters, and pleaded for the chance to serve their country in the air. For them, the war was not only against Hitler-Sepp's Germany, but against a system that doubted their very humanity. The pressure was immense. If even one black pilot failed, the program could be shut down, reinforcing racist beliefs for a generation. The government called it the Tuskegee Experiments, a program born in Tuskegee, Alabama, under the reluctant approval of President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Critics said it was doomed before it began. But to the cadets themselves, this was destiny. At the Tuskegee Institute, young men trained under brutal conditions, the heat of Alabama summers, the relentless drills, the constant knowledge that failure would mean vindication for their doubters. Among them were men like Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., the son of the first black general in U.S. Army history. Calm, disciplined, unflinching, Davis would become the backbone of the Red Tails. But this was more than training. This was a crucible. Every maneuver in the air, every regulation followed to the letter, every ounce of discipline, all of it was proof. They were not just learning to fly, they were rewriting what America thought was possible. Still, doubt clung to them. Within the army, many officers muttered they'd collapse under real combat, and across the ocean, in the skies of Europe, the Luftwaffe watched with amusement. To Germany's most feared pilots, men with swastikas painted on their cockpits for every kill, these rookie-colored flyers would be little more than target practice. The stage was set. Mockery and disbelief on one side, determination and discipline on the other. The question hung in the air like smoke when the Tuskegee pilots finally faced the Luftwaffe. Would they soar, or would they fall? War stories are not written in numbers alone. They live in the beating hearts of the men who fought them. For the Tuskegee Airmen, each mission carried not only the weight of combat, but the burden of proving an entire race worthy of equality. To dearest mother, I know you worry, but I feel in my soul that this is bigger than me. If I fall, I want you to remember that I flew not only for America, but for us. They were sons, brothers, husbands. Some came from cities like Chicago and New York, where jazz filled the air. Others from small towns in the deep South, where the same uniform they wore abroad could not buy them a meal in a white-owned diner. For many, the cockpit was the first place in their lives where they felt free. At their head stood Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., calm, methodical, unshakable. Davis understood what was at stake. He drilled his men harder than any other unit, demanded discipline beyond reproach, and tolerated no excuse. For Davis, excellence was not a choice, it was survival. Beside him were men like Charles Chief Anderson, the pioneering instructor who proved that black men could fly, Roscoe Brown, sharp-eyed and fearless, and Charles Hall, who would etch his name in history as the first Tuskegee Airmen to down a German fighter. Each carried the same invisible weight, the knowledge that every bullet fired, every maneuver in the air, would echo far beyond the battlefield. Back home, families lived with a quiet dread. Some mothers prayed their sons would be safe in the skies. Others feared that even victory abroad would not shield them from humiliation at home. The contradiction was painful. Fighting for freedoms overseas, they were denied in their own neighborhoods. But in the barracks and on the flight line, there was no time for despair. Every man who strapped into a fighter knew what waited above the clouds, the Luftwaffe, the deadliest air force in the world. And soon, the mocking laughter of German pilots would meet the determination of men who had nothing left to prove, except everything. In 1943, the Tuskegee Airmen entered combat. Assigned to the 99th Fighter Squadron, their first missions were in the skies over North Africa and later Italy. They flew the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, an aging aircraft, underpowered compared to the sleek Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs of the Luftwaffe. Already, the odds were against them. German pilots, many of them veterans of the Battle of Britain and the Eastern Front, dismissed the Tuskegee flyers before a shot was fired. To the Luftwaffe, these were rookies, inexperienced, flying outdated machines, painted in colors as bright as targets. But when steel meets fire, arrogance burns quickly. On June 2, 1943, the men of the 99th faced their baptism of fire. German aircraft swept down on American bombers. For the first time, the Red Tails wheeled into combat, heart-pounding, vision narrowing to the crosshairs. In the chaos of the dogfight, Lieutenant Charles Hall spotted a Messerschmitt Bev 109 cutting toward a bomber formation. He dove. Hall fired a burst. Tracers stitched across the German fighter. Smoke poured from the Messerschmitt Seps engine as it spiraled downward. In that instant, the Tuskegee Airmen had drawn first blood. Hall became the first black American pilot in history to shoot down an enemy aircraft. The message rippled through the ranks. These men could fight, and they would fight. But victories were not without cost. The 99th was often given the most dangerous missions: ground attack, close escort, jobs that meant flying low, facing flak, and taking heavy fire. Losses mounted. Some American officers still claimed the unit was a failure, their achievements dismissed as luck or propaganda. The men knew their every move was being scrutinized. One mistake could doom the program. The Tuskegee Airmen Seps real test would come not in isolated dogfights, but in the heart of the war, the long, perilous bomber escort missions deep into German territory. Here, the Luftwaffe reigned supreme, and here, the Red Tails would earn their place in history. By 1944, the air war over Europe had become a brutal war of attrition. Daylight bombing raids tore into the heart of Nazi Germany, but the price was staggering. Each run brought flak so thick it seemed you could step out and walk on it. Each raid invited swarms of German fighters, eager to shred the lumbering bombers from the sky. Losses sometimes reached 25% in a single mission. The 332nd Fighter Group, the Red Tails, were assigned to protect these bombers. For the men, it was a task heavy with irony. They were fighting to defend a nation that still denied them basic rights, risking their lives for bomber crews who sometimes doubted they could even fly. Some bomber crews groaned openly when told their escorts would be colored pilots. But once in the air, prejudice meant nothing. The Red Tails flew tight around the bombers, refusing to chase German fighters into the distance, a strategy drilled into them by Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. The mission, he told his men, is to protect the bombers. That is our purpose. That is how we will prove ourselves. The cost was enormous. On long escorts into Austria, Hungary, and Germany itself, the Red Tails faced seasoned Luftwaffe aces, men with dozens of kills, flying faster, deadlier planes. Some Tuskegee pilots never returned. Engines shredded by flak, fuel tanks burning, parachutes torn by gunfire. Families back home received telegrams wrapped in silence and grief. They tell my father, I fought as hard as I could. Tell him, I didn't sit run. If this is the end, let him know I was proud to wear these wings. Benjamin Davis carried the weight of every loss. Washington brass questioned whether the unit was worth the effort. In closed rooms, whispers spread. Perhaps the experiment had gone far enough. Davis knew the truth. One misstep, one lapse in discipline, and decades of opportunity for black aviators could vanish. The crisis was not just in the air, it was in their hearts. They were proving themselves with blood, but still wondering if anyone back home truly cared. It was in this crucible of doubt and loss that the Red Tails faced their greatest test. The skies of Germany were waiting, and so was the turning point of their story. In July 1944, everything changed. The Tuskegee Airmen received the aircraft that would define their legacy, the North American P-51 Mustang, fast, agile, long-ranged. It was the perfect weapon for deep escort into the heart of Nazi Germany. But it was not just speed and firepower that made these planes famous. It was their tails, painted a bold, defiant crimson, a mark of pride, a warning to the enemy, a promise to the bombers they guarded. The Red Tails are here. The Luftwaffe noticed. German pilots laughed at the bright markings. To them, the crimson tails meant easy targets, flamboyant rookies, but the laughter would not last. On long escorts into Berlin, Munich, and Vienna, the Luftwaffe attacked in waves. Yet the Red Tails refused to break formation. Other squadrons often chased German fighters into the distance, leaving the bombers exposed, but the 332nd stayed locked to their duty. If the Luftwaffe came, they met them head-on. Soon bomber crews began to notice. Missions escorted by the Red Tails saw fewer losses. Crews who once groaned at the thought of black pilots now prayed to see those crimson tails above them. 13 When I saw those Red Tails, I knew we had a fighting chance. They never left us. Never. And then the kills began to mount. Captain Roscoe Brown, fast and fearless, shot down a German Me-262 jet, one of the most advanced aircraft of the war. Charles McGee flew more missions than almost any pilot in the entire conflict, 409 in total. Lee Archer, long denied official recognition as an ace, would claim 4 confirmed victories and become one of the squadron's deadliest hunters. Every dogfight, every bomber saved, every crimson tail streaking through the clouds. It all silenced the doubters. No longer dismissed as a failed experiment, the Tuskegee Airmen were now feared, respected, and most of all, relied upon. But the skies over Europe were far from finished with them. The Red Tails were about to face their deadliest battles yet, where every skill, every sacrifice, and every ounce of courage would be tested against the very best the Luftwaffe had left. What set the Red Tails apart was not just bravery, but discipline. Under Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., the 332nd Fighter Group embraced a strategy that frustrated their enemies and saved countless lives. The order was simple, unglamorous, and absolute: stay with the bombers, protect them at all costs. Omid fear. Other fighter groups sometimes chased German planes, eager for personal glory. The Red Tails did not. Even when temptation came screaming past their wings, a German fighter in their sights, they held position. To Davis, abandoning a bomber was betrayal, and so the Red Tails became shields in the sky. It worked. Again and again, Luftwaffe attacks broke on the Crimson Wall. German pilots expecting easy prey found themselves ambushed by disciplined, aggressive flyers who fought not for medals but for mission. For every bomber that made it home, there were families spared the grief of a telegram. The result spoke louder than prejudice. Bomber groups escorted by the Red Tails consistently suffered fewer losses. To crews flying into the furnace of Germany, the sight of crimson tails became a symbol of hope. We loved those boys. When we saw the red tails, we knew we had a fighting chance of making it back to England. They didn't just fly with us, they saved us. Their methods grew sharper with every mission. High cover formations to break diving attacks, quick turn ambushes to scatter German fighters, coordinated strikes that turned Luftwaffe arrogance into panic. And all the while, they kept their word, the bombers came first. Between mid-1944 and 1945, the Red Tails flew over 15,000 sorties. They destroyed railroads, strafed airfields, and hammered fuel depots. But it was in the duels above the clouds, Mustang against Messerschmitt, discipline against swagger, that their legend was forged. Every mission honed them sharper. Every kill silenced another voice of doubt. And soon, they would face the Luftwaffe set's deadliest machines and its most seasoned killers. The final clash, the moment that would cement the Red Tail set's place in history, was about to begin. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe was desperate. Allied bombers rained fire on German industry, and fuel was running dry. But the Reich still had fangs, in the form of its most advanced weapons, the Me-262 jet fighter and the Me-163 rocket plane. Faster, deadlier, and flown by seasoned aces, they seemed untouchable. To many bomber crews, these new German machines felt like death incarnate. But when the jets came for the bombers, it was the Red Tails waiting for them. On March 24, 1945, over Berlin, Captain Roscoe Brown and his squadron spotted Me-262S slashing into bomber formations. Brown pushed his P-51 into a dive, squeezing every ounce of speed from his engine. Against all odds, he lined up the jet in his gun sight. A burst of fire, and history was made. The world's first operational jet fighter fell to the guns of a Red Tail. That day, Tuskegee pilots downed 3 jets. It was a statement to the Luftwaffe. Technology meant nothing against discipline, courage, and skill. Meanwhile, men like Lee Archer carved their names into legend. With 4 confirmed kills, Archer was one of the deadliest Tuskegee pilots, forever haunted by rumors that he was denied official recognition as an ace because of the color of his skin. Yet in the skies, none of that mattered. Archer's bullets spoke louder than prejudice. By Warsap's end, the Red Tails had destroyed over 100 German aircraft in the air and hundreds more on the ground. They strafed trains, cut supply lines, and hammered fuel depots. Luftwaffe arrogance, once dripping with laughter, was now silence and defeat. But the victory came at a cost. Dozens of Red Tails never returned. Their bodies fell into the fields of Italy, Austria, and Germany. Their names etched into history, but their dreams left unfinished. The reversal was complete. What began as mockery ended as respect. Even German pilots who once scoffed at the Seifert-colored flyers sect came to admit the Red Tails were worthy foes. To the bomber crews who survived because of them, the Red Tails were more than escorts. They were saviors. The May 1945. Nazi Germany collapsed. The Luftwaffe was shattered. For the Tuskegee Airmen, victory carried a double meaning. They had flown more than 15,000 sorties. They had escorted hundreds of bombing missions with unmatched discipline. They had destroyed over 100 enemy aircraft in the skies, and in doing so, they had silenced every voice that once mocked them. To the bomber crews who survived because of their Crimson Guardians, the Red Tails were heroes. Some crews even petitioned Army Command, requesting that only the Tuskegee pilots escort their missions. Respect, once unthinkable, was now carved in steel and sacrifice. But when the war ended, reality struck like cold iron. The Red Tails returned home to a country still chained to segregation. Many of the men who had risked everything were forced back into a world of whites-only signs, barred from restaurants, theaters, and even the same jobs they had before the war. They had fought the Nazis abroad, but Jim Crow still ruled at home. Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. remained unshakable. He stayed in the Air Force, climbing through its ranks. Years later, he would become the first black general in the newly independent U.S. Air Force. His career was proof that excellence could carve cracks into the walls of prejudice. Others built quiet legacies. Charles McGee flew in Korea and Vietnam, a career spanning 3 wars. Roscoe Brown became an educator, a voice for civil rights. Lee Archer entered business, still haunted by the ace recognition denied him. Each man carried the weight of his service and the memory of those who did not return. The Tuskegee Airmen had fought 2 wars, one against fascism, one against racism. Abroad, they had won. At home, the battle would rage for decades more. But the crimson tails had left a mark no one could erase. They had cracked the myth of inferiority. They had forced America to look in the mirror. Their victory was not just measured in enemy kills, it was measured in dignity, in discipline. In the simple truth that when called upon they flew, they fought, and they triumphed as Americans. The story of the Tuskegee Airmen does not end with the Second World War. Their struggle, their triumph, and their dignity echoed into the civil rights movement, into the halls of Congress, into the very DNA of the modern U.S. Air Force. Just 3 years after the war, President Harry Truman issued Executive Order 9981, desegregating the U.S. military. It was a direct result of the example set by the Red Tails. Their courage forced a reckoning. They proved that excellence knows no color and that prejudice weakens nations. To say, we weren't trying to change history. We were just trying to fly. But history changed because we refused to fail. Today, every time a fighter jet streaks through the sky, it carries with it the legacy of those men. Men who were mocked, doubted, and pushed aside, yet still carved their names into the heavens. The Tuskegee Airmen remind us that the fight for dignity is never easy, never given. It must be earned, defended, and passed on. Their story is not just about war, it is about resilience. It is about belief, and it is about the power of courage to bend the arc of history. In the skies above Europe, the Red Tails proved that greatness can rise from the shadows of doubt. Their victory was not just America, Sitsup. It was humanity, Sitsup. May we never forget their flight, their sacrifice, and their unbreakable spirit. If this story moved you, like, comment, and subscribe, and join us again as we uncover more echoes of history.